So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to talk about we're going to talk about the update to the website accessibility regulations. I'm sure you are all fully aware of the requirement for all parish and town councils to meet website accessibility standards for their website. This has been in place now since 2018, but there have been some changes, and they came into place at the end of October last year. So the idea of today's session is to provide you with an overview, a refresher of what the core techniques are to make sure that your website is accessible, how you publish stuff is accessible, and what those changes are that came in October. Now, it's entirely feasible that you may not be aware. You might be new to clerking, you might be new to the public sector, so it might be that you aren't aware of the website accessibility. I'll start again, the website accessibility regulations. So I will be providing a bit of a refresher of that sort of thing as we go through it. It's good for everybody to be aware of those aspects, even if you know of them. They can be quite complex. They are a little bit technical, but I'm hoping that today's session, we're going to be able to perhaps bust a few myths in terms of what should and shouldn't be done, and provide you with some day-to-day tips to make sure that when you publish content on your website, and when people like me talk about content, we mean the words, the files, the pictures, you make sure that it's done in a not just an accessible way, inclusive for those with disabilities, but also in a compliant way. So let's get stuck in. I'm going to recover. These are the things I'm going to cover. Refresher on website accessibility. I'm going to also go through the common issues that we see. At Aubergine, we have something close to 600 parish and town councils on our website platform. We build something around about 2 new parish or town council websites every week. So we see a lot of common issues. Usually they are born from perhaps an unawareness of the rules, but also maybe a misunderstanding. So I'm going to go through some of those, but I'm also going to make it practical, and we're going to talk about how you can resolve those things so that moving forward, what you publish stays accessible. I am also just going to briefly, I know if you were on last week's session, I'm just going to provide a little bit of a refresher in terms of what are the things that you should be publishing. So if you it would just be a short period of time. If you didn't come on last week's session that was talking about all the things that you as a parish council or town council must publish on your website, depending on your size. So under 25k precept, over 200k precept, and that grey zone in the middle where most people sit. I'm sure that Laura and the gang at Calc will be able to help you get access to a recording of that. Now, it's all very well having these publishing requirements, but what's the checking process? How do you know whether you've done it right? I'm going to go through that too. Now, if we have time towards the end, I'm also going to discuss .gov.uk domains. It's a hot topic. It's been kicking around now for something close to a year, certainly in most people's mind. With the funding coming to an end now, that the Cabinet Office provided, it's still very pertinent to look at this. So if we have time, we'll cover that at the end. So let's get stuck in. What is web accessibility? Well, it's a way of presenting information on a web page that works for people with disabilities. Now, there are many, many, many disabilities, probably as many disabilities as there are stars in the sky. And those people use assistive technology on their computer. What is that? That's software and or hardware on their computer to help them interact with the software, use websites. It can be something like a screen reader. I'm sure you've heard of that phrase. That's for people who are loss of sight or have sight-related disabilities, and that's where the computer looks at the words on the page and audibly speaks the words. That's just one piece of assistive technology. There are many. So website accessibility the term really is making the information that you publish on your pages in an accessible way for those people. Now, why does it matter? As I'm sure those of you who are regulars to my webinars and probably have gathered information yourself too, it matters because 1 in 5 people in every community has a disability or a situation that makes it difficult for them to access the information on a website in perhaps a normal way that we all enjoy on this webinar now. We use our sight to look at the screen, we use our hands to control the keyboard and the mouse. 1 in 5 in every community, 20%, have a disability that make that hard. And as a public body, you have to make sure that you publish in a fully inclusive way. Obviously, there are many disabilities: physical, learning, age-related. Crikey, I definitely know that my glasses the prescription needs to be changed, and it seems to be that it's getting changed all the more frequent. So it isn't just physical or disease-related disabilities; it's age too. And as a parish council, as a town council, we need to be fully inclusive in the information that we publish. It must be for everyone. Now, the challenge comes in because websites aren't accessible by default. Just because you've got yourself a brand new website does not mean that it's accessible or compliant. The reason why I've got a picture of a blueberry there, apart from it being it's about that time, isn't it? 11s, which would be very nice to have a blueberry. The reason why I've got a blueberry muffin there is um, website accessibility has got to be baked in at the start when you build the new website. It can't be layered over the top. It's a bit like trying to poke the blueberries into the muffin after it's baked. It's not really a blueberry muffin, and it won't end up what you want it to be. If you haven't put the blueberries in with the batter mix before it gets baked, it isn't a blueberry muffin. Well, in the same way as accessibility, you can't layer it over the top. And later on in this morning's presentation, I'm going to be talking about overlays and pop-ups and plugins that purport to provide website accessibility compliance. So if you specified compliance to the current standard when you commissioned your website, there's every likelihood that it will be compliant, but it's worth it being checked that it isn't via the use of one of these plugins. And I'll come on to that later. Because if you aren't making sure that your website meets the compliance, and by the way, the current standard is something called WCAG 2.2 AA, WCAG, Website Content Accessibility Guidelines. The current standard is 2.2 AA. That was what came in October last year. And prior to that, it's been law since 2018, meeting the standard WCAG 2.1 AA. Now, these acronyms and numbers and letters and all the rest of it, they might not mean much to you, but they are very important because they are the standard against which the website must be built. And the reason why that's relevant is because that's also the same standard against which the assistive technology, the software and the hardware has been built. So if they aren't the same, they can't interface. It's as simple as that. Just as a sidebar, if you are on today's session and your website is with Aubergine, it already meets the WCAG 2.2 AA standard and will always meet whatever the future standards are. That's our commitment to make sure that the standard, whatever it is always maintained without any need for you to change. We deal with that in the background. Fundamentally, public information is for everyone. Every member of your community has a right to access the information on a parish or town council website. Actually, any public body. That's the law under the Disabilities Act, but also the public sector website. But aside from it being the law, it's also the right thing to do. Meeting those international standards is technically the thing to do. But you're talking to your members of the community, and one of the main roles of a parish and town council is to communicate, is to impart information, and is to engage with its community. And if you aren't doing it in a fully inclusive way for those with disabilities, you are not reaching 20% of your audience. Now, that's quite impactful. I'm sure in your head, you already know roughly how big your own communities are. Well, work out what 20% of that is. That's going to be a good number. That's going to be a large number. So unless you aren't if you're publishing things in a non-accessible way, your website isn't built to that standard, you're missing out on the community engagement to a large group of people, aside from the fact that it's the right thing to do. So here are those most common fail points. There's lots here, and I will go into each point in some following slides, but I'll summarize them. So website construction method, how the website has fundamentally been built. Those are some of the most common fail points. It might be that it's been built on one of these large internet provider platforms that you see advertised on telly. I'm not going to name any because I don't really want to spend the next month or two in the High Court. But a lot of those large platforms don't meet accessibility regulations. They can't, because they are primarily designed to provide low-cost websites for your butchers, your bakers, your candlestick makers, none of whom need to meet accessibility regulations. Number two in our hit list, and actually it's a contender for number one, is accessibility plugins. What is an accessibility plugin? Well, it's a bit of software that you can install to your website that pops a little blue icon on your website. Sometimes rather offensively, it's a little icon that's a person in a wheelchair. But sometimes it's like a symbol of a little outline of a person. These accessibility plugins do not meet your legal requirement. They merely layer a few tools over the top that, dare I say it, just pay lip service to those people who don't actually need the accessibility tools. They get in the way, they create greater barriers. I'm going to go into this in a little while because it's quite an important thing. Tables. Tables are so commonly used because usually they're in place for neatness. You've got loads of information you want to present in a nice, neat way. The problem with tables is quite simply, they are awful experiences for people with disabilities because it requires sight to be able to navigate through the table in an ordered way. If you cannot see, if you do not use the computer in a visual way, you've got no chance. Accessible documents and document file names, these are a day-to-day thing that you can have a direct impact on. Making sure that your Word documents are accessible, heading structures, not overly formatted text, and such like. Making sure that those documents are accessible before you turn them into PDFs and adding them to the website. Document file names as well. Think about the user. The user isn't necessarily going to understand your file naming nomenclature. You've got to think about, if a person is looking at this document and it's called EPCAGAR20125, look, that doesn't mean anything to anybody other than you and possibly some members of your council. But to the members of the public, it's gibberish. File names need to be called what they are. We'll go into this in a bit more detail. And then we get, of course, into things like page content formatting. So heading structures on the page, font sizes, link text. Okay, so not using click here. Things like images and making sure that there are alt tags, textual descriptions for images, and also not embedding information into an image as being the only source of the information. And then, of course, we get things like navigation. So what do we mean by navigation? We mean like the menus, the drop-down menus, things like that. Those are fail points. Those are almost certainly a technical thing that you're not going to be able to fix, but nonetheless, they are actually a technical problem. Now, The next item on the list is pop-ups, news feeds, integration with third-party sites like Facebook and Twitter. Those all create massive accessibility challenges. And then after that, obviously, there's things like colors and contrasts, which most people are aware of to varying degrees. I've put accessibility checkers and processes on that. Making sure that you're using the right checking process is important. Don't assume that a checking process is going to be the right one. You might be checking against the wrong standard. So let's get stuck in. That was a whole list of problems, but let's try and provide some practical experience to try and make the use of your website a better experience for those with disabilities. I'm going to start with the plugins, those overlays. There's one of those things that I talked about, right? Little icon in the top right hand corner. I mean, just my own personal opinion, by having an icon that shows a person in a wheelchair as a demonstration of somebody who requires accessibility needs with a website is just straight up offensive. Not everybody's disability is a physical one, and not everybody with a physical disability is in a wheelchair. So that should indicate the view on this. These accessibility plugins do not create an equal experience for people with disabilities. They are typically added to the website after the website was built. Let's call it a sticky plaster, a band-aid, depending on what part of the world you're from. You can't layer it on over the top. If the website's not accessible, you can't make it accessible by sticking a few things over the top. Just because those overlays, those plugins make it so that you can change the font size or you can change it from high and low contrast, that's just one tiny aspect of accessibility requirements. If the website is built to the correct standard, it will automatically interface with the person's computer. And depending on how they've got their computer set up, whether it's reading the words on the page, whether it's outputting the words in a braille keyboard, all manner of different ways. If it's built properly, it will do that by itself. By creating these plugins, it requires the person with a disability to have to interact with that plugin, make some setting changes on the screen in order for it to then work for them. Just creating a much greater barrier. Now, look, this is not just the opinion of Aubergine. The disability community is all agreed on this. Now, there are currently some legal actions going on in the US by some of the providers of these services because many organizations relied on those plugins to meet their compliance. In the US, by the way, meeting accessibility compliance is not just limited to public services, it's big companies too. And that is coming here later this year. So it's called the European Accessibility Regulations, and large companies are going to have to start to meet these regulations too. But anyway, I move on. The disability community is fully agreed on these overlays, these plugins, not meeting the requirement. They don't fix all of the problems. They make the experience an imbalanced one. They don't work well on the mobile, and they don't make it an equal experience. That fundamentally, they don't change the underlying code of your website. Now, at the bottom of the screen there, down there, you'll see a link. And Laura's going to share the slides after today's session with you. Scope, one of the UK's biggest charities that represents people with disabilities, they wrote a fantastic article a couple of years ago on their blog called The Big Hack as to why accessibility overlays and widgets and plugins, as they're often referred to, they do not improve the accessibility. Fundamentally, they get in the way. You're just creating an additional barrier. If you go to a online shopping website, you know, sometimes you're sort of, let's just say, digitally accosted straight away. The moment you arrive, you get a pop-up in the window that says, give us your email address and you get 10% off your first order. And the little X in the box to shoo it away is really tiny. Well, it is described by people with disabilities of using websites that use those plugins a bit like that. It's really hard to get that box out of the way. You've got to be pretty dexterous, especially if you're using the mobile. You've got to be pretty dexterous to get rid of that X. Well, imagine having to do that with an accessibility plugin that's purporting to be there to help you. So if you do have 10 minutes and you want to learn a little bit more, I would encourage you to go and have a look at that article. But fundamentally, accessibility plugins are not the right way to deal with it. So I'm going to move on. And by the way, actually, before I move on, it is almost certain that if you took that accessibility plugin away, the person using your website who perhaps had a disability and used assistive tech will probably have a better experience without that plugin, because at least their software on their computer will be able to interface with the website and work it out. Now, that's not to say that there won't still be accessibility issues, but it'll probably make it a bit easier for them to interface with it. All right, let's move on to something that a lot of people are already aware of, images and graphics. Right, you all, I'm sure, know that if you add an image to a website, you've got to give it alt text, alternative text or description. If you upload a picture of a golden retriever dog, the alt text needs to be golden retriever dog. Just because I cannot optically see does not mean that I'm not entitled to know that there's a picture there. Now, that's a fairly normal process and most people understand, but the bit that creates a bigger challenge is when images of posters and infographics are added to the website. These create enormous accessibility issues because that poster image is containing lots of information. But if I cannot see, my computer isn't going to be able to tell me that there is a fantastic bonfire fireworks stunt fair going on the 4th of November. I mean, I want to go to that. That looks amazing. But if I can't see, I'm not going to know anything about it because the computer isn't going to be able to see those words because the words have been embedded in an image. So here's my advice. If you are going to add poster images of events and things where words are on the page, make sure that the salient info is also typed out onto the web page. This is really important. Now, when you're creating a poster image, for example, I know some of you use Canva. By all means, make it like that bonfire firework example that I've got there on the screen. By all means, make it like that, but just make sure that you put the salient info, the what, the when, the where, and any other salient info also typed out on the web page. You've got to assume that somebody can't see the graphic, can't see the poster, but their computer can see the words that are typed out on the page. This is best that way. But the alt text, the alt text that would go with the picture, you could just describe it as bonfire and firework event poster. You will radically improve the experience for people with disabilities if you adopt this principle wherever you add info. Look, and for full transparency, I know some of you know me already. You'll know I am a parish councillor of it's 12 years this year. But just to offset that, as I mentioned last week, at the end of last year, I took my ILCA. So I'm hoping that one of them offsets the other. So don't throw any digital rocks at me for being a councillor. But in my council, we recently added a gym rig. There it is in one of our recreation grounds. So when I uploaded that picture there to the website, you'll see that I added in there the alt text of the right outside gym rig with punch bag. Well, I don't know whether I mentioned this last week, but I need to adjust the alt text because the punch bag is no longer there. Somebody decided to nick it. But there you go, that's parish council life. But as you can see, it's quite easy. Most website admin areas will provide you with the ability to add the alt text. So please don't forget it. And please don't leave it as the default image text of DSC 13752.jpg because that creates a terrible experience for those who use assistive tech. I'm going to move on now to a really common problem, and that is link text. So this is one of the things, if you listen if you do nothing else that I've mentioned today, except one thing, do this thing. Don't use click here or download or read more as your link text for your documents. It's not descriptive. It does not tell me where I'm going to be going or what I'm going to be opening. And often assistive technology will bunch together all of the links onto a page and read them all out audibly all at once. So it'll go click here, click here, click here, click here, click here, click here. To what? Suddenly it's out of context. So if you are adding your documents, so let's just say you're on your minutes and your agendas page for full council. Make sure that the agenda link text says January agenda or January 2025 agenda. Make sure that the minutes says January 2025 minutes. Say what the link text needs to be descriptive. The same goes also for links to websites. Don't put click here to go to the KCC website. Use the actual words as the link text. I've put North Yorkshire in here, but you could put in there Kent County Council website as your link text, and then underneath that, obviously, it will be kent.gov.uk. You will radically improve the overall accessible nature of your website if you just do this thing. And whilst we're on the subject, please, please, please avoid dumping whole URLs onto your web pages like this. So, and I see it every day. I see lots and lots of parish and town councils that just plop the whole URL on there. Why should this be avoided? It should be avoided because assistive technology reads URLs one letter at a time very slowly. So if you've got a page that links off to the kent.gov.uk, it's going to slowly go https:// I mean, I'm bored with my own voice already, but imagine a page that's full of URLs. It's a terrible experience. So please don't do that. If you're linking to somewhere, put the URL behind some descriptive link text. And whilst we're on the subject of text, it might not be something that you can do anything about. You might need the support of your web person, but making sure that you've got good, clear fonts, text, like my slides, not faintly coloured, not small text. This is not just an accessibility issue for people with disabilities. This is also a very good thing for everybody. We all read a lot. We all skim a lot of reading. So making sure that the font styles and the sizes and everything are easy to read. So whilst we're on the subject of easy to read, let's talk about adding structure to the page. Right. Sequential headings is a phrase that comes up a lot. What does that mean? Well, that means that the sections on your web page need to be correctly structured. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you open a Word document, running along the top there, you'll see that little bar and it'll say H1, H2, H3, H4. They are not styling tools as everybody believes they are. They are to create structure to the document. H1 is only used once on a document and it is the title of the document. And then after that, the major headings on a page are H2 and the subheadings under those main headings are H3. Why is this important? And this is a relevant thing, not just from your Word documents when you're constructing your minutes, your agendas, but exactly the same with a website. So when you arrive at a web page, let's just call it full council meeting documents. We're on that page. H1, full council meeting documents. H2, January. H3, full council. Maybe another H3 would be planning committee. Maybe another H3 would be F&G. And then we've got February. That would be back to H2. Now, it's quite a complex thing to get to grips with. However, if you can add structure to your documents and also web pages, the experience for people with disabilities is so much better. I'll tell you why. And I think I might have mentioned this last Wednesday. A friend of mine, he was a mayor of a town in the southwest, completely blind, and he explained it to me like tearing a page out of a novel and then tearing that page up into 5 or 6 strips and then jumbling up and then trying to get to grips as to what that page of the novel was about. If you don't use sequential headings and you just use headings based on the style, font size, it might be that that number, that H3, H4, H5, is completely out of sequence. So the assistive technology is going to read the content to the person in a weird order. It's going to do it based on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the content might not be how you meant to read the content. So you could end up having the computer read the 5th paragraph on the page first, just because you've selected H1 as the heading style. So this is really important for that reason. But also, if I'm loss of sight, for example, my assistive technology allows me to jump to different sections. I don't really want to have a computer read to me the entire page only to discover that the last paragraph was the one that I'm interested in. However, I'm on a web page that's got correctly structured headings, the computer can read me those headings first, and then I can jump to that section. But unless it's in a right order, I won't be able to do that. Now, this is a technique, this is a publishing technique that you can use in Word documents very, very well, which means that your minutes and agendas and other documents are nice and accessible. But you can also use the same technique on your web page. So we're going to move on now. We're going to move on to tables. There's my favorite phrase from one of my favorite films, and it's from The Hangover, in case you were wondering. Not at the table. Don't tables. Historically, we have all used tables to make our documents look neat. The problem is tables have no navigation. Have you ever tried to tab your way through a table? It goes in some kind of crazy order. Okay? Tables are the preserve of numerical information. Your minutes, your agendas should be set up with sequential headings. Now, I'm not asking you to perform miracles. I have done this in my own council, and I've created an accessible minutes template and agenda template. So after the show today, when Laura sends out the minutes and agendas, there'll be my detail. That's minutes and agendas, the slides, sorry. If you get that and you would like me to share with you the minute and agenda accessible template document, please email me directly, okay? But tables really need to be the preserve of numerical financial information. If you are producing that sort of thing in Excel or a financial application, when you save it as a PDF, it will retain the structure of the document and so will be reasonably accessible. But tables created in Word are awful when it comes to accessibility. There's no way to navigate through them unless they have been constructed properly. Colours and contrasts, I'm sure you all know, but it is nonetheless important to remind you. Avoid pastels. Avoid colours with colours. Something daft like 2 in 5 men are red-green colourblind. I mean, that's a big number. So looking at the page, looking at the colours and the contrast, make sure there is high contrast. Avoid using coloured text on coloured backgrounds. So I'm going to move on to accessible documents now because I'm mindful that we're sort of we've passed the bottom half of the hour now. Accessible documents are going to be something that you work on regularly, probably more than the website itself, I suspect. And at the very least, you're going to be producing agendas and minutes every month, at the very least. So making sure that your Word document templates are accessible before you start is a really good time saver, because it means that ultimately when you produce the PDF for the website, it maintains the accessible nature, but also you aren't perpetuating accessibility issues. Before we go further, please do not use scans of your agendas and your minutes on your website. A scan is just a thumping great picture. Just because you can see words, computers can't see those words. They are not accessible. And some people say to me, oh yes, but we need to upload the signed copy of the minutes. No, you do not. Sorry, did somebody have a question there? No? Okay. You do not need to upload the signed copy of the minutes to the website. You do need to have a copy of the minutes on the website, but the council needs to retain a signed copy in its records. That is the limit. Actually, goes for other things as well, but we'll tackle that shortly. So ensuring your documents are structured, good heading structure, and are accessible when you save them as a PDF, when you upload them to the document, and make sure that you've added a good file name, a nice descriptive file name, you are making that experience much, much better. Now, there are other ways to make sure that the content is also accessible. You can take the content of your minutes and your agendas and actually put it straight onto the web page. Some councils do that, so that you've got no documents, you've just got the content onto the web page. That's fine, but it's probably really only suitable for places that have got lots of team members to be able to maintain that level of content, because otherwise you're going to end up with a website that's going to have hundreds and hundreds of pages. But nonetheless, it's a very, very good way. It's a very accessible method. Here's a tip when you're creating your PDFs. When you've got Microsoft Word open, and as a reminder, Microsoft Word has had an inbuilt accessibility checker since 2016. It's under the Review tab at the top, and then it puts a little button in there. You press that when you've got your document open, and you'll get a box that comes out and it'll tell you whether you've got any accessibility issues or not. It'll also tell you how to fix them. So go through those, make sure that you fix them, so that you can then go save as file, save as PDF, not print as PDF. If you print as PDF, it's just going to make a great big picture. It'll be a PDF, but it'll make a picture of the words. Save as PDF retains all of that structure that you put in place. Now, some people say, I want to add the Word document to the website. I've heard that adding Word documents is much more accessible. But technically, adding the Word document is for people with disabilities. They can download it and then they can fiddle around with the words and the file formats and all the rest of it to make it work for them. But it creates another couple of barriers. One, you are creating a socio-economic barrier, because not everybody has got a Microsoft Office subscription in order to download and edit a Word document. But also it creates a little bit of a data security problem, because if you can download the Word document and you can edit it, you can change the content of those minutes. And whilst you can't add it back to the website, it can be distributed via social media, email, and you've suddenly got an inaccurate council document out there in the wild. Having it as a PDF, it's very, very difficult to change. So I'm going to zoom through the what to publish on the website. You'll get the slides so you can have it as a checklist, and I'm hoping that you probably came last week as well. Here's the list. All ratified policies, councillors' declarations of interest, 5 years of AGAR, your precept and your budget info. Depending on the council size, if you're under 25k, you are in the smaller authorities, so you've got to list payments over £100. You probably do that with your minutes. If you don't, a rolling document is fine. If you are over 200k precept turnover, then it's £500. For everybody that falls in between that, you've got to behave as if you were a larger council, but at the very minimum, you must operate like a smaller council. So at a very minimum, you've got to describe the individual payments over £100. Contact details of the council. You would be surprised how many councils we see. There's no contact details on the website at all. That's not very engaging, is it? An accessibility statement, privacy policy, and I'd also perhaps suggest publishing the Freedom of Information publication scheme. Now, let's talk about agendas, minutes. There is nothing written anywhere that says you must have n number of minutes and agendas on your website. However, aside from the normal publishing it 3 clear days before the meeting and publishing your minutes within 30 days of the meeting, it doesn't need to be the signed one, it could be the draft one. It is recommended that you have 2 years of minutes on your website so that you're spanning at least one whole precept. That's a recommendation. But there are no specific requirements in terms of visibility of minutes and agendas on your website, but obviously the council must retain them in their records forever. Now I'm just going to go back to scans. We see this problem a lot. Scans. Avoid as much as you possibly can using scans on the website. Not just because they are not accessible, but because scans create thumping great file sizes. And we get a lot of people say to us, oh, my host has contacted us, we've run out of space. And you realize that there's a scan of every single minute since 2017. And they're going to take up huge file sizes. You don't need scans of minutes and agendas. The only scans you need are your council's declarations of interest if it's not handled by the principal authority. AGAR, currently, it's a form. Hopefully soon they're going to be digital files. But you do not need to upload the signed documents to the website. Now, when it comes to the AGAR, that's a tricksy one because you're uploading the scans of those documents. So those do need to be on there. But here's my advice. If you've got the Adobe Reader or a PDF reader or writing tool, try your best to redact the signatures off the documents. The signed one will still be in the council's records. That's fine. You've met your obligation. But by redacting the signatures off the website, you are improving your chances of avoiding some defrauding. We have seen a huge number of particularly parish councils suffering fraud attempts because cheque signatories, bank signatories are being stolen from AGAR and ROIs and being used to defraud the council. You do not need to display the actual signature on the website. As long as the council saved the document in its records, great. If you've got that ability with Adobe to redact the signature, what do I mean by redact? I mean draw a black box over the signature, do that. The next one I'm going to talk about is pop-ups and cookie bars. So the new WCAG 2.2 rules that came in October introduced an element called focus. It's a ridiculously technical term and it's not even descriptive, but that's technical people for you. What does it mean? What it means is that you must make sure that your website's buttons and things that can be pressed and clicked can't obscure other buttons and things that can be pressed over the top. One of those classic ones are cookie bars. As you can see on the example that I've put on the screen, the cookie bar appears over other buttons. Well, you can't do that. You've got to make sure that your cookie bar does not obscure anything else. But also it might be that you've got a newsletter pop-up or something like that when somebody arrives at the website. I don't recommend those, by the way. I think they are a terrible thing. But that's more of a marketing phrase than anything else. But ultimately, it's obscuring something else underneath it. And you are requiring me to get it out of the way to interact with the website. Think about the users. You, as a parish or a town council, you have a legal obligation to publish information. But the website is not about you. The website is about the public. So just because you want them to sign up to your newsletter, that isn't primary. experience on the website, being able to get to the information that a person is legally entitled to get to without barrier, that's primary. By all means, have a page that's got a "Hey, join our newsletter," so that people can go there out of their own volition, but don't stick it in their face. These are new WCAG 2.2 fail points. And I think whilst we're on the subject of marketing, communications, right for people who aren't clerks. I've worked in public sector now for a very long time. I know you all have too. And we often go down the rabbit hole of using jargon and terms. I mean, the most common one is AGAR. Honestly, do you think any member of the public know what AGAR is? Of course they don't. Why should they? So we do have a bit of a responsibility to make sure that when we write stuff, we are using plain English. Let's not assume they know. Now, we've gone through all of these things. How on earth do you check to make sure that you've done it right? Well, have a checking process. If you are the person who's responsible for the website content, make sure that you know how to check what you've just done and that you haven't introduced a new accessibility issue. This might be your first time in checking your website's accessibility compliance. Well, the best thing that you can do is to install a free browser checking tool onto your Chrome or your Bing called Wave by WebAIM. There's a link, but you can Google it as well, Wave by WebAIM, and it'll add a little button to the top corner of your website, and you can go to a web page and you can press it and it'll tell you whether you've got any website issues or not. Now, you might not be able to do anything about those issues that it finds, but at least you are aware, and you can then go to your web person or aubergine to help you resolve those. But this will help you on a day-to-day basis when you are updating and adding new content to the website. Look, I'm going to be brave. Here we go. Let's jump over to the Eaton Bray Parish Council website in Bedfordshire. That's where I'm a councillor, and that's what we're going to look at now. There we go. There's Eaton Bray Parish Council, and I have pressed the button in my browser bar. As you can see, no errors and no contrast errors. If those numbers changed to 1, 2, 3, 4, I could press the details button where I'm wiggling the mouse. I could press the details button and it'll tell me what those problems are. It might be that I've used, it's unlikely, but let's just hypothesize and I have written click here. Well, it would point that out. It would tell me where on the page I'd done that. So I could go back into the website, edit it, and fix the problem. It's a free tool to take a quick snapshot of a page. Now, it can't check the whole website. You'll have to go to each page on the website and press the button if you want to check your entire site. And by the way, you remember earlier on we were talking about heading classes, heading sequential orders. There you go. Look, next to Eaton Bray Parish Council, H1. The next heading after that, our historical rural village, H2. And then the next section after that, H3, quick links. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea. On the Aubergine blog, so you can go to aubergine262.com/blog or just go to the menu. On there is a section that's just for website accessibility publishing tips. I've written loads of guidebooks over the years. One of those is a learning session just on how to make sequential headings. It's not bad, even if I say so myself. It's about a 20-minute read and it'll get you to follow some techniques. It's pretty good. You'll be able to apply that technique not just to Word documents but web pages too. So let's move on. Obviously, you're going to need to make sure that you have an accessibility statement on your website. There's great model documents out there available, but it's a living document. It is a document that essentially says, we, the council, understand what our rules and requirements are when it comes to accessibility, and we know what our checking process is, and we have identified that there are some things on our website that are not accessible, and they are here. Now, we're not going to do anything about these things because they've been given to us by third parties. We don't need to. And we're not going to do anything about these things because they predate 2018. But if there are things on there that you do need to address, be clear, say when you're going to do it. Now, let's also not ignore the fact that it is a policy. So you will need to make sure that it gets put in front of council and council ratify it. This is an opportunity, not an inconvenience. It's been in place now for quite a long time, but as I said, you might be new to this. So if you are new to this, this is an opportunity to get in touch with and engage with an extra 20% of your community that so far have struggled to digest the information from you because it's not accessible. That's a big number. I can see, looking at the list of some of our attendees today, there's some town councils here. So 20% of your population is a big number. So this is a really good opportunity to look at the way you publish, make sure it's as accessible as possible. Because when members say to you, hey, we really need to improve community engagement, this is a great way to instantly add 20% to those engagement numbers. So that really concludes the run through of website accessibility compliance and the day-to-day things that you need to be doing. In the last 5 minutes, I'm going to talk about .gov.uk domains. So what is that? It's the suffix on the end of your web address. So such and such a parish council.gov.uk. First thing to note, it is not law and very, very unlikely that it ever will be. However, as you will have seen from the Cabinet Office recent campaign, and by the way, Aubergine are one of the approved Cabinet Office registrars to register and manage .gov.uk domains. It is very much encouraged that parish and town councils move over to a .gov.uk domain because it increases the level of authenticity and trust. In these times of cyber threat and cybercrime and just general online fraud, it is really important that parishioners, members in the community can trust if they go to the council's website, it is the genuine place. You could right now go onto a domain registration place just for demonstration purposes. Let's just say 123reg, and you could register lauraparishcouncil.co.uk. I don't know that there's a place called Laura, but Laura, you're first in my list of names. So suddenly there's this place called lauraparishcouncil.co.uk. And you could put a logo on it. You could put information on it. You could purport to be a council. And you could then email to people in your community and you could say, oh, you've underpaid 10 quid on your council tax. Click here to pay your £10. Unfortunately, we live in a world where, particularly those that aren't online that often, the elderly, they're not going to really be able to tell the difference and they're just going to do it. There's no checking, there's no validation, there's no authenticity. But it's happening. But with a .gov.uk, only UK public bodies can have it. Only an official parish council, town council, city council, county council can have a .gov.uk domain. The checking process that goes through before that can be created is very, very robust. And it means that when people go to the website or get an email from you, they absolutely can trust it. So by default, you are already improving your authenticity and the security, because the security required by registrars like us to be on the .gov.uk network is very high. The minimum standard is to be Cyber Essentials certified, of which we are, among many others. But it is also going to very much help you when it comes to things like GDPR compliance. So if you get an FOI or a SAR, having .gov.uk email addresses, you as the clerk being able to go into your councillors' mailboxes and getting the information relating to that SAR or FOI. If you have got councillors that are using Gmails or their own personal email addresses, you've got no hope of meeting your SAR or FOI requirements. So there are a lot of benefits. Now, whilst the government's funding of £100, which they made available for a short period of time to go towards the cost of transferring over, that ended about 4 weeks ago. However, there are a small handful of registrars, Aubergine included, who are offering a free .gov.uk domain for the first year. Like I say, it's not a legal requirement, but it is very much recommended, and it is defined in the latest edition of the Practitioner's Guide as such. There are lots of benefits for having a .gov.uk domain. I'm not going to go into them all now, but these can be copied and pasted from the slide and put in front of your members in terms of justification. And my details are on the end of the slide. Where are we? There we go. Details are on the end of the slide. If you have any questions for me, if you want to ask any questions about website accessibility compliance or .gov.uk domains before going to your members. But really, that concludes today's session. I think we have a couple of minutes left. Laura, am I okay to answer any questions that our crowd today?
Please do, Mark. Yeah, there is some on the chat. I don't know whether you can see those or whether
Let's just have a little look. I'm going to have to close the slides just to see the chat. So, right. So Elaine has asked, if we use Canva, will that be compliant for posters? Okay. Regardless of what design application you use, it's not about that. If you are choosing to put words in your posters, whether you make them on Canva or Photoshop or whatever, that's irrelevant. What is relevant is when you add that poster picture to your website, that you type out on the web page next to it the salient info that you are embedded in that image. And of course, when you added that image, you also add alt text, the textual description of what the image is. Elaine has also asked what size type should be used. Times New Roman 12, 14. Actually, Times New Roman is not a favoured font for people when it comes to accessibility. The little curly bits, we call them serifs. The little curly bits on the end of the letters. People find that really hard to read if they have learning disabilities or dyslexia. You should be using something called a sans serif. So no serifs, no curlies. A really good example of that is Arial or Helvetica, something that's quite square. In terms of the size, yes, minimum 12. Minimum 12. Now, Judith has said, is it a legal requirement or good practice to put minutes within 30 days? It's good practice. I have this sneaking suspicion it was written down somewhere in an old version of Practitioners that they should be published within 30 days of the minute or within the meeting, or certainly the draft. But I think it is good practice. What have we got here? Andy Howard has said it might not be a legal requirement, but our AGAR auditors commented that we need to move to .gov.uk. Andy, you're correct. It is not a legal requirement, but all of the audit firms, really being driven by Practitioner's Guide, the latest JPAG, yes. Unless you can come up with a really good reason why not to move to .gov.uk, you really should, but it is not a legal requirement. Blah, blah, blah. What do we got here? I can't read the bottom part of Steve Addington or Steve from Addington. I can't read the bottom part of that. Okay, Laura, could you help me there, please?
Yeah, okay, of course, yeah. So Steve's question was, when putting up an agenda, it must be 3 clear days. Is a Saturday considered one of the days? No. I've heard it can be, but not advisable.
No, just clear days meaning working days. Monday to Friday. For absolute transparency. So, for example, if the meeting is on a Monday, you need to be publishing it on the previous Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
And then what's this in regards to saving PDFs from Word?
That's right. Would you recommend saving them in the PDF A format?
Absolutely. The A, PDF, A stands for accessibility. So yes, if your system is offering you to save as a PDF A, do that. Elaine says, yes, Saturday is a clear day. That is not how I interpret JPEG. So I'd be very happy to look into this more, but I have interpreted a clear day as a working day. Very, very happy to be corrected on that, but I think that fundamentally, as long as you've given it a good few days, don't leave it to the day before.
That's all the questions on the chat, Mark. If anyone's got any other questions that they haven't covered in the chat.
Doesn't see any more. If anybody does have any more questions, then my email address is going to be on the slides there. And again, if you want to ask any questions about accessibility or .gov.uk domains, please feel free to come to me directly.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate your much information that we've received today. I think it's been really, really useful again. We do have another session coming up next week. That will be on tips and tricks. That's on Wednesday the 12th, same time, 11 a.m. I know a lot of you on here today have already booked onto that. But if you know of anyone else that wants to come, or if you've not booked onto that, then there's obviously still plenty of spaces and you can do that via Eventbrite. So thank you all for coming today. And thanks once again to Mark. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.